For every cold case that's cracked, there are many more tragic tales of mysterious disappearances or unsolved murders that remain unsolved. Here are 6 truly bone-chilling unsolved crimes that will have you looking over your own shoulder. The Oakland County Child Killer. Known as the babysitter, this unidentified serial killer is known to have murdered at least 4 children, possibly more, between 1976 and 1977. 2 boys and 2 girls went missing from their Oakland County communities, northwest of Detroit, Michigan, and all were found dead within 19 days. Their bodies were disposed of in similar ways and in clear public view. Strangulation and shotguns were used to kill the children, several of whom were sexually assaulted before they were murdered. Most of the children disappeared on their way to a specific location. One victim, a 12-year-old girl, allegedly had plans to run away on her bike. The autopsy of another, an 11-year-old boy named Timothy King, who disappeared one night after going to a drugstore to buy candy, provided perhaps the most disturbing detail of his final hours. In a desperate plea to get their son back, the parents of King turned to the media. His mother wrote an op-ed expressing hope for his return and the promise of his favorite food, Kentucky Fried Chicken. After the boy's body was found in a ditch, a coroner determined the cause of death was strangulation, but also found that the young boy had eaten KFC before his death. A task force was formed to find the killer, and several suspects were identified. They included a man who called himself Fallon, and who admitted in a letter sent to the task force's psychiatrist that he had scouted out children with his roommate, the killer he called Frank. The psychiatrist was able to get the mysterious writer to agree to meet after confirming the alleged accomplice would get immunity, but Allen never showed up for their meeting. In 1978, the task force disbanded. The killer remains unidentified, although internet sleuths have a number of theories about the killings. The unusual deaths of the Jamison family. The bodies of this family of 3 were discovered 4 years after they were reported missing on October 8, 2009. Bobby Jamison, Sherlyn Jamison, and their daughter Madison Jamison disappeared from their truck while on a trip to buy land outside their hometown of Eufaula, Oklahoma. In the days following their deaths, the family's truck was discovered by authorities, abandoned with their IDs, phones, GPS system, and approximately $32,000 in cash. Their dog was also found in the vehicle, malnourished after days of being left in the truck without food or water. In November 2013, the remains of 2 adults and 1 child, eventually confirmed as the Jamison family, were found by hunters around 3 miles from where their pickup was left. Many theories have been floated about the circumstances behind the family's mysterious disappearance. Some believed they faked their deaths, committed group suicide, or were killed by a violent cult. Due to the couple's odd behavior around the time they vanished, others believed that a drug deal had gone wrong. According to some, Bobby's father was involved as he and his son were in a bitter lawsuit at the time. The creepiest theory included a pastor, a confession, and a book. The Jamisons had at one point told their pastor there were spirits in their home and that they had consulted the Satanic Bible to rid the house of them. When authorities searched their property following the initial disappearance, there was a shipping container with messages such as 3 cats killed to date by people in this area. Witches don't like their black cat killed written on it. The case of the lead masks. On August 20, 1966, a boy flying a kite found the bodies of 2 Brazilian men in Rio de Janeiro. Both men were dressed in suits, wearing waterproof coats and lead masks similar to those you'd typically wear to protect against radiation. Discovered alongside their grass-covered bodies on Vinton Hill were 2 towels, an empty water bottle, and a notebook. 3 days earlier, the 2 men had departed Campos dos Goitacazes with a large amount of cash on hand, claiming their trip was to buy supplies and a car. As more information about the men surfaced, it was revealed they were electronic technicians and scientific spiritualists, with interests in both ghosts and extraterrestrials. In the hours leading up to their deaths, Miguel Jose Viana and Manolda Cruz stopped at a bar for water. A waitress, the last person to see them alive, would later tell authorities that both seemed in quite the hurry, especially Viana, who kept checking his watch. It seems there was a reason for this. When authorities inspected the pair's notebook, they discovered the following note: 1630 be at agreed place, 1830 swallow capsule, after effect protect metals wait for mask signal. To this day the cause of death remains unknown. The Sauder family fire. On Christmas Eve of 1945, the Sauder family home in Fayetteville, West Virginia went up in flames. While both parents and 4 of the children made it out, 5 children were still inside. George tried to rescue his children, but was hindered at every turn. The phone wasn't working, the ladder was missing from its normal spot, and George's truck would not start. One of the Sauder children who made it out raced to a neighbor's house to call emergency services. Tragically, the fire department was low on able-bodied men due to World War II. They didn't arrive until the following day, by which point the Sauder home was a smoldering wreck. Authorities determined an electrical fire caused the blaze despite George recently having the wiring redone and the local electric company stating it was safe. Strangely, the remains of the children did not turn up in wreckage. Investigators suggested the fire was so hot it burned up the bodies. Circumstances leading up the house fire only complicated the mystery. George was a vocal critic of Italian dictator Benito Mussolini, to the distaste of local Italian community. In the days before the fire, the Sauders were visited by 2 men, a life insurance salesman and a man seeking work, both of whom warned Sauder to be careful of his home catching on fire. In the wake of the fire, it was discovered that the Sauder family's phone line had actually been cut, and the ladder was discarded at the base of a nearby embankment. Reports then came in of seeing the 5 Sauder children the next day at a diner. Years later, Sauder matriarch Jenny received a letter with no return address. Inside was a photo of a grown man who looked just like one of her missing sons with his name written on the back. The Springfield 3. 3 women mysteriously vanished from a home in Springfield, Missouri, sometime between the night of June 6 and morning of June 7, 1992. After a night of graduation party hopping, 19-year-old Suzanne Streeter and 18-year-old Stacy McCall headed to a friend's to crash. After deciding it was too crowded, the 2 returned to Streeter's house, where her mother Cheryl Elizabeth Levitt awaited. When friends stopped by early next morning to pick up the girls for a planned water park trip, all 3 women were gone. Everything in the house was seemingly untouched: purses, keys, neatly folded clothing. The single thing out of place was a broken glass lampshade for the porch light, which the boyfriend of one of Streeter's friends swept away. In December of 1992, an anonymous tipster phoned the America's Most Wanted hotline claiming they had information about these potential unsolved murders. The caller promptly hung up before they could be transferred to authorities. In 1997, imprisoned convicted kidnapper, robber, and Florida murder suspect Robert Craig Cox told journalists the women had been murdered and buried, never to be recovered. However, there were inconsistencies in his claims that made it difficult to determine whether he was providing false statements. Investigators also received a tip claiming the women were buried under the foundations of a local hospital parking lot. When a crime reporter and mechanical engineer scanned a corner of the lot with ground-penetrating radar, they found the presence of 3 anomalies consistent with a gravesite location. Springfield's police department stated that because the scans were not conclusive, digging up the concrete was not justified. The troubling reappearance of Nicholas Barkley. In this unsolved mystery case involving a real-life changeling, 13-year-old Nicholas Barkley disappeared on June 13, 1994, from his San Antonio neighborhood after a day of playing basketball with friends. Nicholas was the youngest of 3 kids and had a history of getting in trouble. He skipped school, got violent with his family, and even ran away. On the day of his disappearance, he called home to get a ride, but his mother was sleeping, and his brother refused to wake her. Nicholas never made it home that day and was never heard from again. At least not the actual Nicholas. 3 years after his disappearance, the Barkley family received a call from a boy claiming to be their missing son. He was all the way in Spain, after having been reportedly kidnapped and sold into a European slavery ring. The Barkleys were overjoyed, But as soon as Nicholas exited his plane, it became clear that something was wrong. Nicholas looked nothing like the boy who had disappeared 3 years ago. The imposter claimed his abductors chemically changed his eye and hair color, but he also spoke with a thick French accent. While a local TV crew was filming the family, a private investigator working on the production began digging around and found photos that proved physical dissimilarities. The FBI was soon involved, and after running the imposter's fingerprints and a DNA test, they uncovered he was 23-year-old Frédéric Pierre Bourdon, a serial imposter who assumed close to 500 identities, including 3 missing children. In 1998, Bourdon would plead guilty to passport fraud and perjury, spending 6 years in prison. The real Nicholas Barkley remains missing to this day.